I remember that night the way soldiers remember a gunshot, not by the noise, but by the silence that follows. The clinking of silverware, the laughter of my grandchildren, the soft flicker of the Christmas lights, all of it felt like the calm before an execution. My name is Elena Navarro. I'm 69, and on that Christmas Eve I learned that love can sit across from you at the table and still hand you your humiliation with a smile. For 3 years, I had lived in my daughter Bianca's house after losing my husband, Raphael. I believed I was staying with family. What I didn't realize was that I had simply moved into someone else's illusion of generosity. That night, I had spent the entire day cooking beside her, peeling potatoes, cleaning crystal glasses, setting a table fit for a photograph. I had used the last of my pension check to buy presents for everyone, soft sweaters for the children, a new tie for her husband Carl, and a delicate pearl pendant for Bianca that cost more than I dared to admit. I wanted her to see, for once, that her mother could still give. Dinner began with all the makings of a miracle. The candles were steady, the children's cheeks flushed with laughter, and for a few fleeting minutes I allowed myself to believe that the air between us had thawed. When Carl lifted his glass and said, "To family," I almost believed him. I stood to serve myself a small slice of turkey, my own small act of belonging, and that's when Bianca's hand landed on my plate. Her voice was sharp, unshakable. "Mom, you didn't contribute anything to this dinner, so you don't eat." For a second I thought she was joking, that perhaps this was her new way of teasing. But her eyes didn't move, her hand didn't lift, and around me the world turned to glass. Even the children froze, forks halfway to their mouths. The air thickened. I looked at her husband. He didn't blink, didn't speak, didn't even pretend to be surprised. My grandchildren stared at their plates, and I realized that this wasn't a mistake. This was a verdict. I stood there holding an empty plate, the kind of silence that makes the walls tilt, pressing against my ribs. I remember hearing my own heartbeat, slow and disbelieving, as if it belonged to someone else. I waited for her to laugh, to say she was kidding, but the laughter never came. "Helping isn't paying, Mom," she said, her voice cold enough to break the silverware in half. "Carl bought the turkey. I paid for everything else. You didn't put in a single dollar." I could feel every eye on me, the woman who had raised her child alone, the widow who once sold her wedding ring to pay for that same daughter's college. The humiliation wasn't in her words, it was in their quiet acceptance of them. I had spent 40 years giving, and now I was being told I had no right to eat the food I helped prepare. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I placed the plate down gently, as though afraid of waking something dangerous. The lights blurred, and in that moment I felt the final piece of my heart crack, not because my daughter had spoken, but because she had meant every syllable. Later, as I climbed the stairs to my room, I heard the laughter rise again, soft and distant, as if they were celebrating my invisibility. I sat on the edge of the bed that I had once believed was my safe place, and stared at the small Christmas tree I decorated that morning for the children. The lights twinkled, oblivious. I thought about Raphael, about how proud he'd been of Bianca's sharp tongue, mistaking it for strength. Now I understood what it truly was, a weapon sharpened by ingratitude. I didn't cry that night. I didn't even sleep. I just listened to the forks below, to the muffled cheer, to my own resolve growing like a storm in the quiet. People think betrayal explodes. It doesn't. It unfolds slowly, politely, like a dinner invitation that turns into a sentence. And that was the night my sentence ended. Because what Bianca didn't know was that this dinner, this carefully plated humiliation, would be the last time she ever saw me as someone small enough to silence. If you're watching this story unfold, and you've ever felt invisible at your own family's table, stay with me. What happened next changed everything, and before we continue, I'd love your support. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It means the world to know how far our stories travel. Now let's pause for a moment, not just to breathe, but to think. When someone you love crosses the line between care and cruelty, what would you do? A. Stay and try to repair the relationship, believing love can still heal it. B. Leave quietly and rebuild your life somewhere respect can breathe again. I'm curious which one feels closer to your heart. Type A or B when you're ready, and let's see how many of us would choose the same path. That night, I didn't sleep. The walls of the room seemed to close in, filled with the muffled laughter and clinking glasses that drifted up from downstairs. I sat there on the edge of the bed, still wearing my holiday dress, staring at the quiet little tree I had decorated for the children that morning. Its blinking lights seemed to mock me tiny, cheerful reminders that I had believed this would be a night of love and forgiveness. But what had really happened at that table had peeled something away inside me, something I could never put back. When the laughter finally faded, replaced by the soft rhythm of the house settling into sleep, I remained motionless. Grief has a strange temperature. It isn't hot, like anger, or cold, like fear. It's heavy. It presses down on you until your bones feel older than your body. I thought about Raphael, about how proud he used to be of Bianca, about the evenings when we'd talk about her future and how bright it seemed. I wondered what he would think now if he'd been there to watch our daughter reduce her mother to a guest who hadn't paid the entrance fee. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel sadness for what I had lost. I felt clarity, the kind that hurts because it is clean, undeniable, final. The memories began to return in perfect order, as if waiting for me to see them clearly at last. The first month I moved into this house, the way Bianca smiled while saying, "You'll never have to worry again. Mom, you're home now." And then, not even 2 weeks later, the subtle shift, the sighs when bills came in, the way Carl's voice hardened when he said, "Your mother leaves the lights on all night." It started small. I'd offer my pension money, thinking it would ease their burden. $600 a month at first, then 7, then 8, until half of what I had went into a house that never felt like mine. I told myself it was temporary, that once Carl found steady work, things would even out, but they never did. Every time the electricity bill came, Bianca's eyes would land on me as if I were the cause of their struggle. "You know, Mom," she'd say, "it's hard running a house for 4 people." And I'd nod, ashamed, as if I hadn't spent 40 years running one myself. There were other things, smaller perhaps, but cruel in their own quiet ways. The mornings when I'd come down for breakfast to find that they'd already eaten, the kitchen cleared, the smell of toast lingering like a memory. The evenings when they would order takeout and eat in front of the TV, and I'd hear Bianca's voice drift up the stairs. "We thought you'd already eaten, Mom." I learned to hide my hurt behind politeness, to stay useful, to make myself invisible, because invisibility, at least, was safe. But invisibility doesn't erase humiliation, it collects it, like dust in corners you stop cleaning because you don't have the strength. And that night, sitting alone under the blinking lights, I realized that I had let my own silence feed their disrespect. I thought of every bill I had paid, every favor I had done, every smile I had forced when they treated me like a burden. I had confused generosity with surrender. The more I remembered, the more the truth revealed itself. This hadn't happened suddenly at dinner. It had been building, slowly and precisely, like a wall they had been constructing brick by brick, until I was trapped inside it without realizing it. The difference was that now I could see the mortar between the stones made of manipulation, dependence, and the comfort of my compliance. I looked around the room and saw proof of it everywhere. The furniture that had been moved from my old home because Bianca insisted, "We'll make space for everything." My late husband's books on her shelves downstairs. The photograph of Raphael and me that used to hang in our hallway now tucked behind a stack of magazines. Every piece of my past had been absorbed by their present, repurposed to decorate their life. I was living inside what used to be mine, yet I owned nothing. The longer I sat there, the less I could ignore the whisper forming in my mind, a whisper that sounded a lot like Raphael's voice. "You don't have to stay." For months, I had brushed that thought away, convincing myself that family meant sacrifice, that leaving would make me the ungrateful one. But after what happened at dinner, I finally saw that sacrifice had turned into servitude, and love had become a ledger. I stood, turned off the lights, and opened the curtains. Outside, snow was falling, soft and relentless, covering the street in white. It looked peaceful, but I saw the truth beneath it. No matter how pure the snow looked, underneath it lay the cold ground. That's what this house had become, something beautiful on the outside, cold and cruel beneath the surface. As I watched the flakes drift past the window, I began to think about all the signs I had ignored. The way Bianca spoke to me as if I were a child, the way Carl rolled his eyes when I mentioned the pension, the faint disgust in their voices when I made small mistakes, forgetting where the salt was or how to use the new microwave. I remembered the last argument I had overheard between them, the one that ended with Bianca saying, "We just need her to hold on a little longer." At the time, I didn't understand what it meant. Now, I did. I began to sense something deeper, darker, beneath their behavior, something more than irritation or fatigue. A calculation. The way they treated me wasn't just disrespect, it was strategy. Every word they had spoken about helping me settle in, every gesture of concern, had been rehearsed, crafted to keep me in place. I was a living pension plan, a backup account disguised as family. The realization didn't break me, it cleared the air. My humiliation transformed into focus. I went to the dresser, opened the small drawer where I kept a notebook, and began to write. Not a diary, but a record. Dates, amounts, patterns. Proof of every withdrawal, every expense I covered, every moment I had been manipulated into guilt. I didn't know yet what I would do with that record, but I knew it mattered. It was the first act of reclaiming my story. The night stretched on. Somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, I made tea and sat by the window again. The snow had stopped. The silence outside mirrored the silence within me, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt like the pause before a beginning. By dawn, I knew that something had shifted permanently. The woman who had gone to bed humiliated would not wake up the same. The light coming through the curtains was thin, almost fragile, but it reached the room like an invitation. I realized then that power doesn't always arrive with thunder, it sometimes begins with stillness. I didn't know how, but I would find a way to leave, not as a victim escaping, but as a woman reclaiming her ground. I didn't yet know what proof I would find, what truths would be uncovered in the days to come, or how far my daughter's betrayal had really gone. But as the first light touched the floor, I made myself a promise. I would never again beg to belong at a table where my worth required proof of payment. That morning, as Bianca's alarm went off down the hall, I lay quietly, pretending to sleep. I listened to her footsteps move past my door. She didn't know that the silence she left behind was no longer submission. It was planning. And soon, very soon, that silence would speak louder than any word I had ever said. The next morning, the house was quiet, covered in a stillness that didn't feel peaceful but staged, like a crime scene waiting to be discovered. Bianca and her family had gone to the Christmas market downtown, leaving behind the faint smell of cinnamon and a sink full of dishes. I stood at the top of the stairs, gripping the banister. The events of the night before had hardened into something sharper, something I couldn't ignore. My humiliation was no longer pain, it was fuel. I needed to know how deep their betrayal went. I needed the truth, not the version they fed me, but the one they whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. Bianca's bedroom door was slightly open. I hesitated only a moment before walking in. The curtains were drawn, the bed unmade. On her nightstand, her phone lay plugged into the charger, buzzing softly with notifications. For years I had respected her privacy, convincing myself that trust was a mother's duty. But trust had turned me into prey. I reached for the phone. Her password came to me immediately, Lily's birthday, 112016. She used it for everything. The screen unlocked with a simple press, as if it had been waiting for me. I opened her WhatsApp, scrolling through her chats until I found a group named Household SM. The initials meant nothing at first, but the first message I read made my stomach turn. Carl, I can't stand your mother here anymore. She's always in the way. Bianca. I know, but we need her pension until we're caught up. Maybe 3 more months. Tops. My hands began to tremble, but I kept reading. There were dozens of messages, plans, calculations, even jokes about me. Lila, Carl's sister, had written, "My friend works at Street Fernand Residence. It's cheap, like $425 a month. You can pay it out of what she gives you and still have money left." Bianca's reply was a knife to the heart. "Perfect. 4 beds per room, so she won't get lonely. And it's far enough away that she won't be popping back every weekend." I scrolled faster, as though speed could protect me from the words. Every message was a layer of betrayal I hadn't imagined possible. Carl had suggested they wait until after Christmas so she doesn't ruin the kids' holiday. Bianca had agreed, adding a heart emoji at the end of her sentence. That heart felt obscene. Then came the message that stopped me cold. "Last night," Bianca had written, "I dreamed Mom died in that nursing home. I didn't feel sad, just relieved." I stared at those words until the letters blurred. There it was, the truth stripped of all civility. My daughter didn't just want me gone, she wanted me erased. I took a deep breath and began taking photos of everything. Each screenshot was proof, time-stamped and labeled. I photographed her profile picture, the chat title, every vile message that followed. My shaking hands steadied as I worked, because now I wasn't acting out of emotion. I was gathering evidence, and evidence meant control. In another thread, Bianca and Carl discussed selling my furniture once I was settled in the home. "That old dresser she loves is worth at least $200, Carl had written. "And we could get rid of all that junk she keeps in her closet. She won't need any of it where she's going." I thought of that dresser, the one Raphael and I had bought together during our first year of marriage. It wasn't just wood and drawers. It held memories, letters, and pieces of a life I had once built from nothing. To them, it was only inventory. For a moment, I felt faint. The betrayal wasn't abstract anymore. It was itemized, priced, and planned. I sat on the edge of Bianca's bed, the phone heavy in my hand. I remembered the years I had spent teaching her compassion, reminding her that family came before comfort. I had failed to realize she had learned the opposite lesson, that comfort came first, even if it cost your family. My eyes fell on a stack of papers by her vanity, mortgage notices, credit card statements, and a spreadsheet labeled Projected Expenses 2025. My pension was highlighted in yellow. Next to it, a note in Bianca's handwriting. "Use for car, groceries, extras. Don't tell her exact total." It was no longer a suspicion, it was a financial trap disguised as family. My life had been repurposed into their budget. I set the papers down carefully and returned the phone to the charger, leaving everything as I had found it. But the truth I carried back to my room was heavier than anything I'd ever lifted in my life. Once inside, I locked the door and sat at my desk. The snow outside the window fell in thin, lazy lines, the world quiet and white. Inside, my thoughts raced. Every sacrifice I had made, the early mornings, the years of double shifts at the tailor's shop, the nights I stayed up sewing so Bianca could go to college, had been transformed into a number they could exploit. And yet beneath the horror, something unexpected stirred, relief, because now I knew. The fog that had kept me guessing, the endless questioning of what I had done wrong, it was gone. They had built a lie, and I had finally stepped outside of it. I took out my notebook and wrote a single line across the top of a fresh page. "They want to get rid of me." Then, beneath it, I began listing everything I had seen. The dates, the amounts, the nursing home's name. Each line made me feel stronger, as if I were reclaiming pieces of myself they had chipped away one by one. By the time the clock struck noon, I had filled 3 pages. I didn't know what I would do yet, but instinct told me to move carefully. This wasn't just about leaving, it was about leaving in a way that would make them answer for what they'd done. I opened my drawer and pulled out the manila envelope where I kept important papers, my ID, birth certificate, bank statements. I slid the notebook pages inside. Then I looked at Raphael's photo on my nightstand. His kind face seemed to hold steady approval. He'd been practical, not emotional, in moments of crisis. "Gather facts first," he used to say. "Act later." That's what I would do. I would gather everything, every receipt, every bank slip, every piece of paper that could protect me. I would no longer play the helpless mother they expected. The sound of a car door closing outside jolted me. My heart pounded. I quickly closed the drawer and went to the window. It was just a delivery truck, but that single noise reminded me that time was short. They could come home at any moment. I sat again, and let the silence settle. Betrayal, I realized, doesn't destroy you. It refines you. It burns away the illusion until only truth remains. And mine was simple. My daughter and her husband were not my family anymore. They were predators in the language of politeness, dressing greed as responsibility. Before they returned that afternoon, I had already made my decision. I wouldn't confront them, not yet. I would let them believe I was still the naive old woman who didn't know how to unlock a phone. But inside, I was already gone. That night, as they ate dinner downstairs and laughed about their trip, I lay awake rehearsing my next move. Tomorrow, I told myself, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, I would stop surviving in their house and start planning my escape from it. Because the only thing more dangerous than a mother humiliated is a mother who has stopped being afraid. By the time dawn crept through the blinds, I had already decided to leave. Not in anger, not even in fear, but in absolute certainty. The kind of certainty that doesn't announce itself with words, only with a stillness inside you so complete that it almost feels like peace. I sat at my desk, staring at the manila envelope that now contained the evidence. The screenshots, the notes, the copies of every financial transaction that proved what Bianca and Carl had done. My hands no longer trembled. They had steadied into something quiet and unyielding. The house was still sleeping. From the hallway came the faint sound of the furnace clicking on, followed by the slow hum of heat pushing through the vents. I moved with deliberate calm, every motion practiced in my mind before I made it. First, I folded Raphael's photograph, the one of him standing beside the half-finished garden fence, and slipped it into the envelope. Then I packed a single suitcase, 2 sweaters, 1 coat, my medications, a notebook, and the cash I had withdrawn secretly over the past few weeks. When you live in a home where love feels conditional, you start preparing for departure long before you admit it to yourself. I looked around the room once more. It was filled with things that used to belong to me but now felt like evidence of someone else's life. The lace curtains Bianca had chosen, the floral bedspread she bought on sale. Even the air smelled of an expensive lavender spray that had always given me headaches. Nothing in this room was truly mine anymore. That realization didn't hurt as much as I expected. It only made leaving easier. The snow outside glowed faintly under the early light. I knew that if I waited until afternoon, Bianca would be home, and there would be questions, maybe even accusations. So I needed to go now. While the house was wrapped in its pretense of peace, I wrote a letter, not an explanation, not an apology, just a clean, measured farewell. "Bianca," I began, "this is not punishment. It is protection. You once said that family means taking care of each other. I am taking care of myself now. I wish you wisdom in the years ahead." I signed my name simply Mom and left it on the pillow. Before I left the room, I opened my phone and sent a single message to the only person I trusted to understand what I was about to do. Nora Alvarez, my neighbor from Lincoln Park. We'd known each other for 30 years, bound by small kindnesses, shared groceries, phone calls after our husbands died, quiet laughter that filled the spaces grief had carved out of us. I wrote, "Nora, I need to stay with you for a little while. I'll explain everything later." Within 5 minutes, she replied, "Come home. I'll make coffee." The taxi arrived just before 7:30. I carried my single suitcase down the stairs, each step lighter than the one before it. In the living room, the Christmas tree still blinked in the dim light, a monument to a family I no longer belonged to. Beneath it, the wrapped presents waited, the pearl pendant for Bianca, the children's toys, the bottle of wine for Carl. I left them all untouched. When I opened the front door, the cold hit me like a blessing. My breath turned to mist, and for a brief moment I hesitated, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock in the hallway, the distant creak of pipes. It struck me then how much noise a house can make, even when there is no warmth in it. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me, with the same quiet finality one uses to close a chapter that has gone on too long. The cab driver helped me with my suitcase. He was a young man, maybe 25, polite but tired. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked. "Lincoln Park," I said. "Near Belmont and Sheffield." He nodded, glancing at me through the mirror. "Early start for Christmas." Yes, I said, watching the house shrink behind me. Very early. The drive took 20 minutes. I spent every one of them memorizing the route not because I wanted to find my way back, but because I needed to remind myself I was capable of direction, that I could still choose where I went. Chicago's streets were half asleep, dusted in snow and pale light. I thought about how many women like me had made similar journeys, quiet exits in taxis, bags filled with proof, hearts carrying more history than belongings. When we reached Nora's building, she was already waiting by the door, wrapped in a thick gray sweater. Her face softened when she saw me. "You look like you've been holding your breath for years," she said. "Maybe I have," I replied, "but I think I can exhale now." She led me upstairs to her small apartment, a second-floor walk-up that smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish. The space was warm, lived in, safe. On the kitchen counter sat 2 mugs and a plate of toast. I sank into the chair by the window, the weight of the past 3 years lifting from my shoulders one breath at a time. Nora poured coffee and waited until I spoke. "I found messages," I told her. "They planned to send me to a nursing home, sell my things, use my pension. It was all written down." She didn't interrupt or gasp. She only nodded, her eyes calm but fierce. "You did the right thing leaving," she said. "You don't owe anyone proof of your humanity." I wanted to cry, but the tears didn't come. What came instead was clarity. I told her I had evidence, that I wanted to take control of my finances, that I needed to make sure Bianca and Carl couldn't reach me. Nora listened, then offered exactly what I needed. Practical steps. "We'll go to the bank first thing tomorrow. You'll change every account. We'll make sure no one can touch your money again." That night, in Nora's spare bedroom, I unpacked my suitcase and placed the envelope on the bedside table. I looked at it and realized that it contained not only proof of betrayal, but also the beginning of my freedom. The snow outside had stopped, and the streetlight cast a soft gold halo across the curtains. For the first time in years, I felt safe enough to sleep. Just before closing my eyes, I thought of Bianca and the moment she would find the letter. I wondered how she would react: anger, confusion, maybe even guilt. But I didn't let the thought linger. It was no longer my responsibility to manage her emotions. My only task now was to rebuild mine. When I finally drifted into sleep, it was not with sorrow but with resolve. Tomorrow would be the day I began to reclaim everything they had tried to erase: my autonomy, my dignity, my future. I didn't yet know how much strength that would require, or how far they would go to chase what they thought they'd lost, but I knew this. I had already crossed the hardest threshold. I had walked out of their house and into my own life again. And sometimes that's how freedom begins, not with a fight, not with fireworks, but with a woman walking away quietly at dawn, carrying nothing but proof and the unshakable knowledge that she deserves better. The next morning, I woke to the soft gray light of winter filtering through Nora's curtains and the smell of coffee drifting down the hall. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. The room was warm, unfamiliar, and safe. A strange combination for someone who had spent years living in quiet fear. Then it came back to me, the cab ride through empty streets, the way the cold had bitten my cheeks as I walked away from Bianca's house for the last time. I wasn't in my daughter's home anymore. I was free, though freedom, I realized, was not always comfortable at first. Nora knocked gently before pushing the door open, a mug in her hand. "You slept through the storm," she said. "The snow's piled high out there." I sat up, rubbing my eyes. "It's been a long time since I slept through anything." "You'll learn again," she said softly, setting the mug on the nightstand. "You're safe here, Elena. Whatever comes next, you'll face it on your feet." Her faith in me felt both comforting and foreign. I had spent so many years being told that I couldn't manage alone, that my age made me fragile, that my confusion, real or invented by others, proved I needed supervision. Now, the only supervision in this apartment came from Nora's cat, a slow-moving creature who regarded me with bored suspicion. After breakfast, we bundled up and walked to the bank. The cold air stung my lungs, but I welcomed it. It made me feel alive, present, sharp. Inside the bank's quiet lobby, I explained everything to the teller, then to the branch manager, and finally to a woman named Miss Patel, who handled senior accounts. She recognized me at once. I had been there many times before with Bianca. "Mrs. Navarro," she said, her tone polite but cautious. "Your daughter usually handles these transactions with you." "Not anymore," I said evenly. "I'm handling them myself." Something in my voice must have told her I meant it. I placed my ID and paperwork on her desk, followed by the new evidence I had brought copies of the withdrawals Bianca had made using our joint account, all without my consent. I explained what I had discovered, the messages I had photographed, the plan to move me to a nursing home. Miss Patel's eyes softened. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Navarro. This kind of thing happens more than people realize." "It shouldn't," I said, "but I suppose silence gives permission." I was silent too long. We spent nearly 2 hours closing accounts, redirecting my pension, canceling automatic payments, and issuing a new card with a new PIN. Each form I signed felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself that had been borrowed, misused, or stolen. When we finished, Miss Patel stood and shook my hand. "You're very brave," she said. "Most people your age come in here afraid. You came in ready." "I was afraid for years," I replied. "Fear loses its power once you name it." By the time Nora and I stepped back outside, the sun had broken through the clouds, scattering light across the snow. The city looked different to me now, not gentler, but more honest. Everything cold and bright, nothing pretending to be what it wasn't. We spent the rest of the afternoon gathering practicalities, changing my phone number, updating my mailing address, buying a prepaid SIM card so Bianca couldn't reach me. I called the post office and redirected my pension correspondence. The woman on the line asked for a reason for the address change. "New beginnings," I said, and she laughed softly. "I'll mark that down as relocation," she said. That evening, Nora made soup. We ate in silence for a while, listening to the faint hum of the heater. Then she said, "What will you do now?" I thought about it before answering. "I don't know yet, but I do know I'm not finished." "Meaning?" "Meaning I won't just disappear quietly. Bianca and Carl counted on my silence to keep their hands clean. I won't give them that comfort." Nora nodded. "Then you'll need a lawyer." "I know one," I said. "A woman named Margaret Hall. She helped Raphael with his estate years ago. If she's still in practice, she'll help me again." The next morning, we went to see her. Margaret's office was small but orderly, her desk lined with family photographs. She listened carefully as I told her everything from the dinner humiliation to the WhatsApp messages to the nursing home plan. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "You have more than enough to pursue both criminal and civil remedies, but I sense that's not what you want." "No," I said. "I don't want to ruin them. I just want to stop them." Margaret studied me. "Then we do this strategically. We secure your finances, file notices preventing access to your pension, and quietly notify the authorities. You'll keep the upper hand by staying calm and methodical. Let them expose themselves." Her words steadied me. She drafted a statement for the bank confirming that all previous permissions were revoked and attached the screenshots I'd provided. She also advised me to file a precautionary report with the local police, documenting potential elder financial abuse, not to start a war, she said, but to create a record. Records protect truth. I left her office feeling lighter, though not free yet. Freedom, I was learning, wasn't an event, it was a process. Every step mattered. The phone call, the form, the small refusal to let someone else write my ending. That night, I called Bianca's number from the new phone. I didn't expect her to answer, but she did, almost instantly. "Mom? Where are you?" Her voice was a blend of panic and irritation. "I'm safe," I said simply. "What does that mean? You left without saying anything. The kids are worried. You can't just—" "I can," I said, and I did. "I know about the messages, Bianca, about Street Fernand, about the furniture, about everything." There was a pause long enough to contain a lifetime of lies. "Mom," she said finally, her tone softening into a performance I recognized too well. "You misunderstood. We were just talking. You took it out of context." "No," I said, calm and certain. For the first time in my life, I took it in context, every word. Her composure cracked. You can't survive on your own, you know that. You need help. I have help, I said. I just stopped mistaking manipulation for care. Before she could answer, I hung up. My hand was steady, my breath even. Nora, who had been sitting across the room, watching quietly, smiled. You sounded like a woman signing her own emancipation. Maybe I was, I said. That night, I sat at the window and looked out at the snow-covered street. Somewhere across the city, Bianca was probably pacing, realizing the money she had counted on was gone, that the woman she thought she could control had vanished. For years, she had believed that I was her responsibility, her burden, her tool. But she had forgotten one crucial thing. I was the one who had taught her everything she knew about survival. And now, I would teach her one last lesson, that when you strip a mother of her dignity, she doesn't crumble. She rebuilds herself out of the wreckage you created, and she does it so quietly, so completely, that by the time you realize what's happened, she's already beyond your reach. That was the night I stopped being afraid of losing my daughter, because the truth was, I had already lost her. What remained was my life, and I intended to claim it back, one deliberate act at a time. The first few days after I reclaimed my accounts were strangely quiet. The silence that used to suffocate me now felt like a shield. I woke up each morning at Nora's apartment to the sound of the city stirring beyond the frost-glazed window. Somewhere in that stillness, I began to rebuild the part of myself that had vanished in Bianca's house. But peace, like all fragile things, does not stay untouched for long. By the end of the week, the phone began to ring. At first, I ignored it. Bianca called from new numbers every day. Then Carl started texting short, angry bursts of control disguised as concern. Mom, we just need to talk. You can't make these kinds of changes without consulting us. You're being manipulated. Their words came faster, louder, more desperate. I didn't answer. I had nothing left to say that could be twisted. But the silence only fueled their fury. One afternoon, as Nora and I were coming back from the grocery store, I saw them. Bianca and Carl stood by the curb waiting. Carl's car idled, snow dusting its hood. My daughter looked smaller than I remembered, but sharper, her beauty carved into something rigid. Mom, she called, her voice echoing against the buildings. We need to talk. Nora gripped my arm. You don't have to. I know, I said, but I will. I turned to face them. Bianca stepped forward, the cold pinking her cheeks. You're making a mistake, she said. You're listening to the wrong people. People who don't steal from me? I asked. Carl's jaw tightened. You're confused. We were helping you manage your money. You can't just... I managed fine before you decided I was incompetent, I interrupted. You took my trust and turned it into a job description. Bianca's eyes darted to Nora, then back to me. You're embarrassing us. No, I said quietly. You embarrassed yourselves when you put a price tag on my life. Her composure faltered for a second. I could see the crack in the mask, the moment she realized I wasn't the woman she could guilt anymore. Then came the shift, her tone turned soft, syrupy, familiar. Mom, she said, reaching out. We're family. We can fix this. I stepped back. Family doesn't write about shipping you off like old furniture. Family doesn't rehearse lies. You wanted control, not connection. Carl took a step forward, his voice rising. You're lucky we took care of you as long as we did. You lived under our roof, ate our food. I cut him off. I paid for that roof. I paid for that food. I paid for everything you called generosity. He opened his mouth to argue, but Nora stepped between us, her phone raised. Walk away, she said calmly. Now. The warning in her tone was enough. Carl muttered something under his breath and turned back toward the car. Bianca hesitated a moment longer, her eyes full of something I couldn't name, rage, guilt, or perhaps the first flicker of fear. You'll regret this, she whispered. I already did, I said, for years. They drove off, and the street fell silent again, snow muffling the world like a secret. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. The shaking was something else release, Adrenaline, a body remembering what power feels like after too long without it. Back inside, Nora poured me tea without a word. We sat in quiet companionship as the kettle hissed softly. "Finally," she said, "they'll come again." "I know," I said, "but next time I won't open the door." Over the next week, their attempts grew more desperate. Carl left voicemails, threats wrapped in legal jargon he barely understood. "You signed a joint account," he said in one. "That means shared assets. You can't just take everything." In another, "We can get a power of attorney if we have to." His voice cracked near the end of that message, as if he was beginning to realize he had lost something far more valuable than money. When Bianca finally texted me again, it wasn't rage, it was guilt's last performance. "The kids miss you," she wrote. "Lily cried last night." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Tell Lily I love her. Tell her I'm safe. But I won't come back to a house where love costs rent." Then I turned the phone off. The following morning, I met again with Margaret Hall, the attorney. She had reviewed the situation and drafted legal protections. Bianca and Carl were barred from accessing any financial records or accounts in my name. Margaret also suggested sending a formal notice detailing the evidence of financial abuse, but with a tone of finality, not vengeance. "We don't escalate unless they do," she said. "Control the narrative by refusing the chaos." That phrase stuck with me. Refusing the chaos. It became a kind of mantra. Every time the phone buzzed or the doorbell rang, I repeated it silently. But power, once reclaimed, demands responsibility. I couldn't live indefinitely in Nora's spare room. I needed to start over somewhere that didn't carry the echoes of humiliation. I spent evenings scanning listings, and within a week, I found a small apartment overlooking the lake. It was modest, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 chairs, a bedroom with light that stretched long across the floor in the afternoons, but it was mine. I signed the lease using the funds Bianca once claimed I was too old to manage. Moving in was quiet work. Nora helped me carry boxes, her laughter filling the empty rooms. We hung Raphael's photograph above the kitchen table. "You're home," she said when we finished. I smiled, feeling something I hadn't in years. Ownership. Not of objects, but of my own existence. For a while, I believed that would be the end of it, but abusers rarely surrender their power gracefully. A week after I settled in, I received an envelope slipped under the door, no return address, just my name scrawled in Bianca's hurried handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Mom, we're sorry things went too far, but we're desperate. Please call us. We can't afford the mortgage without your help." There was no apology. Only need. I folded the paper neatly and placed it in the same envelope that held all the evidence, the photographs, the printouts, the notebook, proof of every choice they made. That envelope was my shield now, a reminder of the difference between love and dependency. That evening, I stood by the window, watching the streetlights blink on one by one. The city below hummed with its ordinary life, people carrying groceries, couples arguing softly, a boy pulling his sled through the slush. Somewhere in that noise, I felt my heart steady. Bianca and Carl could rage, plead, or threaten, it didn't matter. Their voices had become distant, like static from a channel I'd stopped tuning into. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had served its purpose. It had woken me. What I felt now was something quieter, stronger, unbreakable. I didn't need revenge. I needed peace. And peace, I had finally learned, isn't given. It's built brick by quiet brick, in the space left behind when you stop explaining your worth to people determined not to see it. That night, before I turned off the lights, I wrote one last line in my notebook. They taught me to vanish. I taught myself to exist again. And for the first time in decades, I slept without dreaming. Winter eventually surrendered to the faint promise of spring. The snow melted into streams that ran down the sidewalks, washing away the last footprints of the year before. By then, I had been living in my new apartment for over a month. The walls had begun to carry the soft scent of coffee and cedar, the floorboards creaked in familiar rhythm, and every object had a story that belonged to me alone. I should have felt completely at peace, but life, I've learned, always keeps one final test hidden behind its quiet moments. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning. I was watering the fern by the window when I noticed a car idling across the street. A silver sedan, familiar but not immediately recognizable. It lingered for a few minutes before driving away. The next day, it appeared again, same spot, same time. I told myself it was coincidence. But the third day, when I saw Carl step out, all denial evaporated. He didn't approach the building. He stood by the car, phone pressed to his ear, scanning the windows, watching, hunting. I backed away from the curtain, heart pounding. It wasn't fear of him. Exactly, it was the recognition that the people who once called you family can become strangers far more dangerous than any thief. They know your weaknesses. They know where to press. That evening, I called Margaret Hall. "They've found me," I said. She told me to stay calm, to document everything. "Do not confront them directly," she warned. "We'll let their own persistence incriminate them," I agreed, but I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Carl was not the kind of man who accepted defeat quietly. For the next week, the car appeared every morning, sometimes with Bianca inside, sometimes without. They never came to the door, but their presence was deliberate, a reminder that peace is a fragile thing when built over someone else's resentment. Nora noticed it too. "You can't live like this," she said. "It's harassment." "It's desperation," I replied. "They're losing control, and control is the only language they understand." That night, I installed a small camera facing the street. Margaret's nephew, a cybersecurity expert, helped me connect it to a private feed. "If they try anything, we'll have proof," he said. Proof. That word again, the same anchor that had saved me before. I realized that truth, when properly recorded, can become its own form of armor. But the situation escalated faster than I expected. On the 9th day, I returned from the grocery store to find the door slightly ajar. My stomach tightened. I stepped inside quietly, every sense on alert. Nothing looked disturbed at first glance, but then I saw it, the framed photo of Raphael on the floor, its glass cracked. It had been taken from the wall and dropped. Not by accident, a message. I called the police. Officer Daniels, a young man with patient eyes, arrived within 15 minutes. "No forced entry," he said after inspecting the lock. "Any idea who might have a key?" "My daughter and her husband," I said. He nodded, writing something in his notebook. "Would you like to file a restraining order?" "Yes," I said. My voice didn't shake this time. "Yes, I would." By the next afternoon, the paperwork was filed. Margaret helped expedite it, and the court granted a temporary protection order. Carl and Bianca were legally barred from approaching me, contacting me, or entering my property. I thought that would end it. But people who believe they're owed something rarely respect boundaries drawn by law. 3 days later, at dusk, the building's intercom buzzed. I didn't answer, but I could hear Bianca's voice through the static, trembling between pleading and rage. "Mom, please, we need to talk. Just 5 minutes. Please don't do this." Then her voice hardened. "If you keep this up, you'll regret it." I didn't respond. Silence was my only weapon now. After she left, I found another envelope under the door. This time, it wasn't a letter, it was a photograph. My grandchildren, Lily and Ben, standing outside their old house, holding a sign that said, "We miss you." My chest ached. For a moment, I almost broke. But then I noticed something else in the photo. The same silver sedan parked behind them. The image wasn't about love. It was bait. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker across the snowless pavement, trying to make sense of how love could twist so cruelly. By morning, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life reacting to their games. I was going to end it. I called Margaret again. "I want to take formal action," I said. "No more warnings." She agreed. We gathered everything, the messages, the surveillance footage, the report from Officer Daniels, even the photograph of my grandchildren. When we met with Detective Morgan from the Financial Crimes Unit, I laid everything out on the table. He listened silently, flipping through the evidence. When he spoke, his tone was measured. "This is more than elder financial abuse," he said. "It's coercion and harassment. We can move forward with both charges." I felt the room tilt, the air grow heavy. Justice was within reach, but justice always comes at a price. I nodded. "Do what you need to do." Over the next few weeks, the investigation unfolded quietly. I stayed in touch with Nora and kept my routines simple: morning walks by the lake, afternoons at the senior center teaching sewing classes, evenings reading under the lamp Raphael once used to repair watches. Life felt suspended, half normal, half bracing for the storm to break. It broke one morning in April. The phone rang just after 8. It was Detective Morgan. "We've made the arrests," he said. Bianca and Carl were taken in for questioning this morning, the prosecutors filing charges for attempted financial exploitation and criminal trespass. I didn't say anything for a moment. My throat was too tight. "Are they angry?" I asked finally. He hesitated, then said, "They're shocked. People like this always are. They believe manipulation is care until the world calls it what it is." After I hung up, I sat by the window again, the same place where I'd once watched their car idle. The street outside was calm, ordinary, children laughing on their way to school. I realized something profound then. Peace doesn't return as it left. It comes back wiser, quieter, carrying the shape of your scars. Later that week, Nora baked a lemon cake to celebrate. "To closure," she said, raising her teacup. "Not closure," I corrected gently. "To continuation." Because I knew this wasn't the end. Legal battles have echoes. There would be hearings, statements, perhaps even appeals, but none of that frightened me anymore. The woman who once trembled at her daughter's voice was gone. In her place stood someone unrecognizable to the people who thought they could break her, a woman carved by betrayal but refined by resolve. That night, before I went to bed, I wrote a single line in my journal. "I was once their safety net. Now I am my own foundation." It wasn't victory, I felt it was peace layered with truth. And truth, I had come to understand, doesn't need to shout, it simply endures. The first court hearing was held in mid-May, in a room that smelled faintly of dust and old paper. I sat on the left side of the courtroom beside Margaret, my attorney, while Bianca and Carl sat on the opposite bench with their lawyer. They looked smaller than I remembered, worn down, pale, nervous. For the first time in years, I didn't feel fear when I looked at them. I felt distance, as if we were actors in a play that had already ended, still pretending there was more story left. When the judge entered, everyone stood. His voice was calm but firm as he summarized the charges: attempted elder financial exploitation, coercion, and trespass. Words that once would have shattered me now sounded like the truth I had been waiting to hear spoken aloud. As the hearing began, Margaret laid out the evidence: bank transfers, unauthorized withdrawals, screenshots of the WhatsApp conversations. When the photo of the Street Fernand residence appeared on the monitor, Bianca looked away. Carl clenched his jaw, pretending anger to hide shame. Then came the moment that silenced the room. Margaret played an audio recording I hadn't known she would include. One of Carl's voicemails, his voice low and threatening. "You can't survive without us. You'll regret this." The words hung in the air like smoke. For years, those tones had ruled me through fear. Hearing them here, under the cold light of justice, stripped them of their power. The judge raised his eyes from his notes, fixing Carl with a look that said everything. By the end of the day, the court issued a permanent restraining order. Bianca tried to speak then, asking for leniency, but her voice trembled and collapsed into tears. "She's my mother," she said. "I never meant to hurt her." The judge paused before responding. "You may call her your mother, but your actions called her something else." I walked out of the courthouse with Margaret and Nora by my side. Cameras clicked in the distance. Apparently, cases of elder financial abuse were attracting public attention lately. A reporter approached me, asking how I felt about the verdict. I answered simply, "I feel free." It wasn't a line crafted for sympathy, it was the truth. Over the next few weeks, the story spread through local news outlets. I didn't read most of the articles, but Nora kept a few clipped for me. The headlines were both painful and vindicating. Mother reclaims life after family betrayal. Elder abuse case ends with daughter's conviction. Some neighbors sent letters of support, others avoided me. perhaps fearing they might see their own guilt reflected in my story. Bianca and Carl both accepted plea agreements: probation, restitution, mandatory counseling. They wouldn't go to prison, but they would face public accountability. Part of me thought it was too lenient. Another part was grateful it was over. Justice, I realized, is not always punishment. It's the chance to live without fear. But endings, real ones, rarely come neatly packaged. A month later, I received a letter postmarked from a women's correctional program. It was from Bianca. I hesitated for days before opening it. Inside was a handwritten apology, not like the manipulative ones from before, but something quieter, humbler. "Mom, I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know I understand now. I used to think dependence was love, that control meant safety. I see what I became, and it terrifies me. You didn't just save yourself, you saved me from becoming worse." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and set it aside. I didn't cry. There are tears that cleanse, and there are tears that undo you. I wasn't ready for either. That summer, my life began to fill again, slowly, like light returning after a long storm. I joined a community class at the senior center, teaching younger women how to manage finances and spot the signs of manipulation. "Trust is sacred," I told them, "but it should never be blind. Love that demands proof of your obedience isn't love, it's ownership." They listened closely, taking notes, some with tears in their eyes. Every time one of them thanked me, I felt a quiet pride bloom inside my chest. I also began volunteering at a local legal aid group. Margaret introduced me to a network of advocates who helped older adults reclaim stolen assets or escape predatory guardianships. Listening to their stories, I realized how common mine had been and how few women found the strength or support to fight back. I wanted to change that, even in small ways. Nora, ever the guardian angel, insisted we celebrate. "You've earned your new life," she said, hosting a small dinner at her apartment. There were candles, laughter, and even a touch of music. Halfway through the evening, she raised a toast to Elena, who turned betrayal into wisdom. Everyone clinked glasses. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the warmth wash over me, the sound of genuine affection, the kind that doesn't demand repayment. But perhaps the most unexpected change came from within me. I started painting again. It had been decades since I'd picked up a brush, but one afternoon, inspired by the lake's shifting colors, I bought a small canvas. The first strokes were uncertain, but soon they flowed. What emerged wasn't beauty, it was honesty. A landscape fractured by light and shadow, yet whole in its imperfection. One morning, as I painted by the window, I noticed two figures walking along the path below, a woman and a young girl. The sunlight hit their faces just right, and for a second, I could have sworn it was Bianca and Lily. My heart clenched, but I didn't rush to the window. Instead, I smiled faintly and returned to my canvas. If it was them, perhaps time had softened what law could not. If it wasn't, then it was simply life reminding me that love, no matter how scarred, never truly disappears. By autumn, I had built a rhythm of quiet purpose. My apartment had become a sanctuary filled with books, plants, and the soft hum of the city outside. Each morning, I opened the curtains to the lake and whispered a small promise to myself: never again will I trade peace for belonging. The last time I saw Bianca was months later, outside the courthouse during a follow-up hearing. She approached cautiously, her hair tied back, her face pale but calm. "Mom," she said softly, "I'm trying." "I know," I replied. "Trying is where healing begins." She nodded, eyes glistening, then turned away. That brief encounter didn't erase the past, but it planted something new, a fragile seed of forgiveness, waiting for the right season. When I returned home that night, I stood by the window, watching the city lights ripple across the lake. I thought of Raphael, of the girl Bianca used to be, of the woman I had become. So much had been lost, yet something greater had been found. The unshakable knowledge that survival is not just continuing to breathe, it's choosing to live with dignity, even when love has failed you. I dipped my brush into gold paint and added one final line of light across the canvas. It shimmered like the edge of dawn, the promise of another beginning. For the first time, I no longer painted from memory, I painted from peace. The morning after that quiet meeting with Bianca, I woke to a kind of stillness I hadn't known in years. No phone buzzing, no footsteps outside my door, no tension waiting behind the next call. The air itself felt different, as if the house was finally exhaling after holding its breath for too long. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the first streaks of sunlight stretch across the lake. That's when I realized what freedom really was. Not the absence of pain, but the space where peace could breathe again. I didn't want to waste it. I had lost too many years to fear and confusion, to guilt dressed as love. So I began to build something from the wreckage, piece by piece. The first thing I did was take the settlement funds I'd recovered and create something useful, a small foundation named the Silver Thread. Its mission was simple: to help older adults facing financial abuse or coercion from their families. Margaret helped set up the legal side. Nora, ever the practical one, handled logistics. We launched with modest resources, but word spread quickly. The first client was a 72-year-old woman from Oregon who'd been tricked into signing away her home to her nephew. The second was a retired teacher whose son drained her pension. As I listened to their stories, I realized they all shared the same refrain. I thought love meant saying yes. I started traveling to community centers, libraries, and churches anywhere that would let me speak. At first, I stumbled, unsure how to shape my pain into purpose. But with each telling, the tremor in my voice softened. I told them that love without respect is just a softer form of theft, that kindness doesn't mean surrender, and that trust must be earned, even by family. After one talk, a woman hugged me and whispered, "You said what I never could." That was the moment I knew I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was helping others do the same. Months passed, seasons turned. The lake outside my apartment mirrored every change: the gold of autumn, the frost of winter, the renewal of spring. In that rhythm, I found a kind of healing that no courtroom could give me. But the story didn't end there, because stories like mine never truly end. They only evolve. One afternoon, as I was preparing a presentation for a local advocacy group, I received an unexpected letter from Lily, my granddaughter. The envelope was bright yellow, the handwriting careful and looping. Inside, on lined notebook paper, she'd written, "Grandma, Mom said I could write to you. I miss you. I'm learning how to paint. Mom says you used to paint too. Will you send me a picture of your favorite one?" I sat there for a long while, the letter trembling in my hands. It wasn't just words, it was a bridge. Proof that something in Bianca had changed, even if only slightly. I chose a small painting of the lake at sunrise, wrapped it gently, and wrote back, "Dear Lily, this one reminds me that light always returns after long nights. I hope you paint something even more beautiful." I mailed it the next morning. Weeks later, another envelope arrived, this time from Bianca. There were no pleas or excuses, only a few honest lines. "Thank you for sending that painting." Lily hung it by her bed. "I've been working 2 jobs. I'm trying to be better. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm trying." I didn't reply right away. Forgiveness isn't a single act, it's a long, uneven walk through memory. But something in me softened. I could finally think of Bianca without anger tightening my chest. Perhaps some wounds don't close with confrontation. They close quietly, when both sides stop bleeding. In July, the Silver Thread held its first official fundraiser. We rented a small community hall and decorated it with sunflowers and framed artworks donated by local seniors. I gave a short speech, simple, heartfelt, nothing rehearsed. "I once believed that losing my family meant losing my story," I said. "But I learned that sometimes we must lose the familiar to rediscover the true meaning of love. It isn't control. It isn't fear. It's the quiet choice to protect what is good, even when it hurts." When the applause came, I didn't cry. I just smiled and thought of all the women I'd met who had done the same, chosen survival, dignity, truth. By autumn, the Silver Thread had helped more than 40 clients. Margaret joked that I'd turned my pain into a profession. "Not a profession," I told her. "A promise." One evening, as leaves danced down the street, I returned home from a long day of consultations. There, on my doorstep, was a small box wrapped in brown paper. No name, just my address. Inside was a watercolor set, new brushes, vivid pigments, and a note, "For new beginnings, B." I didn't need to wonder who it was from. I placed the box on my desk beside my journal. Then, for the first time in a long while, I painted without hesitation. I painted not the lake, nor the sky, but a figure, a woman standing by a door, light spilling around her. Her hand rested on the knob, not to close it, but to open it. When it was finished, I titled it "Return, Without Regret." That night, I wrote one final entry in my notebook. Healing isn't revenge. It's the moment you realize you no longer need to prove you were right. Peace speaks louder than justice ever could. I don't know if Bianca and I will ever rebuild what was broken, but I no longer carry the burden of needing to. Love doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like understanding from afar, both of you standing in the light of what you've learned, even if on different shores. As the moonlight settled over the lake, I poured a cup of tea and watched my reflection blur against the glass. For the first time, the woman staring back didn't look haunted or lost. She looked complete. And that, I realized, was the true ending of my story. Not the court verdict, not the foundation, not even forgiveness. It was this quiet certainty that I had turned my own name into a promise that no betrayal could break again. And as the night deepened, I whispered softly to the stillness, "You are free now, Elena. You finally are." The first snow of December arrived quietly, almost shyly, settling on the window ledge outside my apartment. It reminded me of another winter long ago, the kind where I'd wait for Bianca and Lily to come home, setting out hot cocoa on the stove and watching the clock tick. But this time, there was no ache, no hollow waiting, just the stillness of a life reclaimed. The past no longer demanded explanation. It simply existed, like old photographs tucked in a drawer. What mattered now was the life that had unfolded since the one I had built, from truth instead of fear. The foundation, the silver thread, had grown beyond anything I imagined. By the end of the year, we had helped over 100 women and men reclaim homes, pensions, and most importantly, their voices. Some came trembling, whispering apologies for bothering us, as if asking for dignity required permission. Others came fierce and furious, ready to fight. I saw myself in all of them. Each time, I reminded them, "You are not alone, and you are not crazy. Love shouldn't hurt your spirit." The words became our anthem. The media began calling me an advocate, a survivor, even a symbol of resilience. I smiled politely at the headlines, but knew the truth. I wasn't a symbol. I was simply someone who refused to stay silent one more day. Pain had become my teacher, not my identity. In late January, an invitation arrived from the state legislature. They wanted me to testify in a public hearing about elder financial exploitation. I hesitated at first. I wasn't a politician or a legal scholar, just a woman who had survived betrayal and learned to navigate paperwork and courage in equal measure. But Margaret encouraged me. "You're not speaking as an expert," she said. "You're speaking as proof." So I went. The room was packed, lawmakers, journalists, citizens. I carried no notes. When my turn came, I simply spoke. I told them about the slow erosion of trust, how love could be used as currency, how manipulation hid behind gentle smiles. I told them about signing forms I didn't understand, about the night I found my door unlocked, about the morning I decided enough was enough. I ended with this: we teach our children that family is sacred, but we must also teach them that sacred things should never be used as weapons. The room fell silent. One senator wiped her eyes, another nodded slowly, and in that silence I felt something shift, not in them, but in me. I had turned my story into more than survival. I had turned it into prevention. After that day, the Silver Thread received an influx of donations and volunteers. We expanded outreach to rural areas, offering workshops on financial literacy, estate protection, and emotional boundaries. Nora took charge of education programs, and I focused on mentorship, meeting one-on-one with survivors who had just begun their journey out of darkness. One afternoon, a woman named Teresa came in. She was 66, thin, trembling, clutching a folder of bank statements. Her voice cracked as she said, "My son says I'm too old to understand my own money." I looked her in the eye and replied, "Then let's show him exactly how wrong he is." We spent 3 hours reviewing documents, building a plan, and by the time she left, she smiled through her tears. "I thought I'd lost myself," she whispered. "But maybe I just forgot where to look." That night, I sat in my apartment with a cup of chamomile tea and reread her thank you note. I realized something quietly profound. Helping others heal had become the final stage of my own healing. The act of guiding someone else through their storm reminded me that pain, when transformed, becomes a compass for others. Spring came again, softer this time. Lily's letters grew more frequent stories about school, art, and a stray cat she'd named Whiskers. Each one was a thread, fragile but real, connecting two worlds that no longer needed to mirror each other. Then, in May, a card arrived with Bianca's handwriting beneath Lily's. "We'd like to see you. Just coffee, nothing more." I thought about it for 3 days before agreeing. We met at a small cafe by the harbor, neutral ground. Bianca looked older, tired, but peaceful. Lily rushed to hug me, her arms warm and unhesitant. For a moment, the years between us vanished. We talked about ordinary things: her classes, Bianca's new job at the bookstore, my foundation's latest work. No apologies, no tears, just conversation. As we were leaving, Bianca paused and said, "You once told me love isn't control. I didn't understand it then. Now I do." I smiled. "Understanding is the beginning," I said, and it was enough. That summer, the Silver Thread received national recognition. We were invited to partner with a network of senior protection agencies. I declined interviews, preferring to stay behind the scenes. The work wasn't about fame, it was about continuity. Still, on the Foundation's first anniversary, Margaret insisted on a small gathering. "We celebrate not the pain that brought us here," she said in her toast, "but the courage that refused to let it define us." I looked around the room, faces of women who once came to us broken now standing tall, laughing, planning futures. There was no trace of pity, only strength. I thought of Raphael then, his steady hands fixing watches, his voice saying, "Time doesn't heal, Elena. It teaches." And indeed, it had. As the evening drew to a close, Nora handed me a gift, a silver locket shaped like a thread looped into a circle. Inside was a single word engraved, "Endure." I closed it in my palm and whispered, "Always." In the quiet weeks that followed, I finished a memoir not for profit, but as a legacy. I titled it "The Quiet Rebellion of Kindness." It wasn't about revenge or victory, it was about resilience, the kind that grows unseen beneath the surface until one day it blossoms into light. When the manuscript was done, I placed a copy in the library of the senior center where my journey began. The final entry read, "I once believed justice meant punishment, but true justice is living freely after someone tried to take your freedom. It's waking each morning without dread. It's loving without fear. It's knowing that survival, when done with grace, becomes its own kind of power." One evening, as the sun dipped behind the lake, I sat by the open window and watched the reflection shimmer like molten gold. I thought of all that had been taken and all that had been returned. Then I whispered the same words I'd told those who came to me for help. "You're not broken, you're rewritten." The wind carried that whisper across the water, scattering it into the world. And for the first time in a lifetime of storms, I felt no need to hold on to anything, not anger, not sorrow, not even pride. Only gratitude. Because in the end, my story wasn't about what was lost, it was about what endured. And that, I realized, is the truest kind of ending one that keeps beginning again. When the dust finally settles and the noise of pain fades, what remains is not the memory of betrayal, but the understanding of how you rose after it. Elena's story began in silence and humiliation, but it ended in wisdom and restoration. She learned that dignity isn't something another person can take. It's something you choose to protect, even when you're standing alone. Through every confrontation, every lonely night, and every courtroom battle, she transformed fear into strength and grief into guidance for others. What she rebuilt wasn't just her life, it was her belief in her own worth, a belief that no longer depended on the approval of those who once tried to control her. At its core, her journey reminds us that love and loyalty are not the same thing. Love uplifts, loyalty without respect destroys. Sometimes the most loving act is the one that draws a boundary. The courage to say no more is not cruelty, it's self-preservation. And forgiveness, when it comes, isn't about forgetting what happened, but freeing yourself from the grip of bitterness. Elena didn't win because her daughter apologized or because justice prevailed in court. She won because she stopped letting pain decide the limits of her life. In today's world, where so many seniors face manipulation, neglect, or emotional pressure from those closest to them, her story speaks to something universal: the power of reclaiming agency. Whether it's financial independence, emotional boundaries, or the simple act of speaking your truth, your peace has to become your priority. And that's something no one else can give you. You must claim it. If you take anything from Elena's story, let it be this: strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to start again, to write a new chapter on your own terms, no matter your age or what has been lost. Life doesn't end when people betray you. Often, that's where your real life finally begins. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe forgiveness is necessary to find peace, or can someone heal completely without it? Share your honest view in the comments so we can learn from each other's experiences. And if this story touched you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep creating heartfelt stories like this one, stories about resilience, dignity, and the strength that never fades with age.